Thank you very much, Sarah. And hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. As Sarah says, we're going to be talking today about the world of collaboration and video conferencing in particular. And I think it's extremely important we do so, bearing in mind this situation we all find ourselves in this global pandemic, which has resulted in huge technological and cultural change with regard to conferencing platforms. So I'm joined today by three panelists, and I'll be grateful if you could introduce yourselves. Maybe if we start with Jason.
Thank you, Adam. My name is Jason Goecke. I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I work for Intel, leading the Intel Unite Collaboration Software Group. And I've spent my career in various aspects of telecom and about the last decade in collaboration.
Thank you. Marty?
Hi, Marty Bodley. I'm from Bose Corporation. I'm actually the director and head of what we're calling Bose Work, which is our new initiative getting into unified communications. So with products and services that are addressing video conferencing and audio conferencing. So, and I've been with Bose roughly 2 years here at the headquarters right outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, and lastly, TJ.
Yep, my name is TJ. I work for Google. I had a product for our Google Meet hardware business that includes meeting room hardware as well as the Jamboard.
Perfect, thank you very much. Okay, well, to kick us off, I want to start talking about home working. Obviously, we've all been thrust into this situation. Some have worked from home for a long period of time, but for others, it's completely new. And certainly on the scale that we're seeing at the moment, it is completely new. So really, how much of an opportunity is this revolution to the technology world, and in particular the collaboration world? Jason, maybe if you want to start us off with that.
Absolutely. I think the opportunities are going to be that we're going to see a reconfiguration in how people work when they go to the office. We're going to see a hybrid model where we're going to see more collaboration spaces. We're going to see more people joining from home. So there's going to need to be this constant online connection and really new use cases that allow people to interact in new ways, in more ambient ways as well going forward, rather than always just showing up for a meeting, maybe having always on video in different spaces to do that. And how do you maintain privacy and all of those things? So I think there's a lot of opportunities that'll be developing in that direction.
Okay, and which technologies do you see bridging the home and office?
So it comes down to video technologies like Google Meet and Zoom and others obviously will permeate between the two. But it's when you move into the office, how do you create an environment that the space will adapt around you and give you the tools you need? And then when you're back home, the same thing at your desk. So it becomes a seamless experience between the two. So is there going to be some type of an ambient compute capability that develops that allows one to effectively seamlessly move between the two and have all of the access to the different technologies they would in the office also at home? And I think that was one of the challenges we had in shifting everyone suddenly to work from home, is there was just a massive crush on the different networks. Zoom and WebEx had problems and others, but also just the different use cases and training people and everything else. So how do you make that more seamless going forward? And I think there will be an opportunity for in-room collaboration systems in both places to make that more seamless.
Okay, TJ, obviously the Jamboard is a key technology for Google. How do you see this evolving?
Yeah, we definitely see the rise of not just the need of communication, but collaboration as well. And as you mentioned with the Jamboard, obviously not everyone can afford a large device like that in the home environment. But what we are hearing from customers as well as the industry is that, to the earlier point mentioned about having equitable working experiences, is because a lot of folks are going to be working remotely, the analog whiteboards in workplaces need to be digital. And so then there's also needs to be a sort of accompanying product or form factor for those who are working remotely. And what does that look like? Is that a tablet? Is it another device? And so there's just a lot of opportunity, I think, for technology to play a role here into solving those things. And I think the challenge between this hybrid work environment to provide this equitable and seamless experience of both being in the office and at home is real estate. I think it's a real estate impact also for the office, as well as for how much space do people have at home, whether it be it's a desk in a corner Manhattan bedroom, or a personal office that they've converted a room to. So I think this is what everyone is trying to figure out, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity for innovation right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Marty, do you have something to add to that from Bose's point of view?
Yeah, I think, going all the way back to your original question about, what do we see the opportunity? I mean, we're really excited about this sort of shift from 25 million knowledge workers that were remote prior to COVID, moving up to 150 million sort of coming out of COVID. So, maybe we're at 300 or 400 million today because everybody's sort of still working remotely primarily. But when we do end up in this hybrid model, it's going to land somewhere, estimates are being, around 150 million. So there's a massive shift there in the number of people trying to do work and have good communications, collaboration from remote locations. Similarly, on the sort of in the buildings, the video enablement there is also similarly going to be going through a big shift, and we're excited about that. Some of the estimates are showing the number of video endpoints for huddle spaces moving from today, maybe 600,000 a year, moving up to the 3 million a year. I'm citing some Frost numbers in one of their latest reports. So again, there's going to be video enablement going on within the walls of the buildings to try to facilitate all these new meetings that are happening. And so we're excited about trying to have products and services that address the huddle spaces. We have a lot of wearable technologies, personal wearable stuff. So for those remote users like our 700 UC and some of the other TWE in-ear products that we've got out now, Bose is really putting down a lot of stuff on wearable side. So for those knowledge workers that are remote, depending on where they are and what their job is, we're excited about bringing these new wearable technologies to make the experience better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting is that a number of you have mentioned the hybrid working approach, where you obviously have some people working at home, some people in the office, and that interchanging throughout the week, perhaps. What impact is that going to have on the office itself, particularly in terms of the meeting rooms? Are you going to see meeting room investments decline as more people work from home, or increase because of the increased need for video and collaboration technology? Who wants to?
I would say what we're going to see is potentially an increase in meeting spaces. People are no longer going to be going and working from an office or a cube when they do go into the office. You could do that at home, and the upshot of everyone being forced to work from home, everyone now realizes that. Some of us have always known that, but now I think everyone's kind of embraced and understand that that's possible. There may be outliers, of course. And I think what we're going to see is facilities of large organizations paring back on some real estate, but the real estate they do have will reconfigure and do build outs that have more collaboration spaces. And then those collaboration spaces will have to be kitted out with things like Jamboards, collaboration elements that allow you to do things remotely. One of the things that my team did, I run an engineering team, is we had team rooms where you put your stickies up and you're doing your Scrum and things like this. We've gone completely virtual, and we're going to need spaces that can configure around us and instantiate those, and no longer have physical spaces that we're relying on with sticky notes and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that I don't see coming out of this that people will want to go to the office to sit in their own cube or their private office, right? They can do that at home. So reconfiguring things around when you do go to the office, you're with other people. Of course, initially during this transition period, it'll have to be socially distanced and things like that. But the reason to go to the office is not to go and sit and do heads down work. It's to be around other people and collaborate real time with people. And you may have to patch people in who weren't able to make it into the office today. But why go into the office if all I'm going to do is sit and look at a video screen and do the same thing I could have done from home? So, I do think there'll be a lot of enablement of technology, but in different kinds of spaces and places where it easily allows people to come together. And when they are in the office, they're around each other.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add there's a slightly different perspective that I'm hearing from some customers who are trying to figure out what their build outs are. There are a certain set of employees that do not want to be at home and need to find a place to work. And so, a lot of large tech companies are who have declared, everyone can work from home. their IT folks are just trying to figure out like what do they do for those employees that do want to be at work, do want to sort of separate that work from home due to whatever reasons that they have, whether it be real estate or other reasons. But I do think that the concept of the meeting room is evolving. It's what I would consider video endpoints or collaboration endpoints, and whether that be smaller phone rooms or group collaboration spaces or team spaces or whatever those things are. I think the real challenge is going to be how do companies either make those permanent or flexible enough to to manage their real estate. I think that's and then how does the technology, the audio video technology, sort of adapt with that environment? That's what I see.
Yeah, and adding to that, TJ, one last thing is that how do we get people back to work safely? We've seen in Denmark the COVID mutation in the mink population and could undermine vaccines. And this is going to be with us here for a while. And one of the things we've been doing on Intel Unite is creating a plugin environment where you can draw in the ability to do IoT. You can do people counting through cameras. Let people know what the occupation of that space is. So it's creating all the compliance and technology awareness to make sure people are staying safe when they are in the office as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think TJ, you mentioned the word flexibility there, and I think from the feedback we're getting, that is one of the number one things people are looking for at the moment, is because you don't know where your workforce are going to be in terms of in the office, working from home, working in a meeting room, whereas a meeting room historically has perhaps been a place where you would have a meeting and then patch one or two people in. Now it could be that, it could be most people dialing in from home. So flexibility is absolutely essential. Just really quickly, another something that someone mentioned was the social distancing aspect. I think it was you, Jason. Social distancing obviously means you can't sit as closely together as maybe you would have done previously. So does that have an impact on the size of meeting rooms and the technology involved there?
I believe it does, because it does have an impact on obviously the size and how much space you need for each person, but also how do you create environments where you can network rooms together within the same office building without going out to the cloud and things like this. Are there ways to say this room joins this room, and you have a scheduling system that allows you to do that when you take space into consideration, and how do you automate that? So I believe it'll absolutely have an impact.
Okay. Good. Well, one of the things I think everyone's noticed over the past 8 months now, I guess, is that the transition to conferencing platforms has meant a real drop-off in the number of calls made on traditional telephones. Do you see this as the death of telephony in the workplace, or are we overstating that by saying that? Marty, perhaps you can take that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had a phone call on my desk phone at work, for 3 years. So, I think it certainly is putting maybe the final nail in the coffin. But I mean, if you're doing phone calls, it's on your mobile phone, not on any kind of hard infrastructure system. So I think we're moving clearly away from that. One of the things we're saying now is that video conferencing is as important as email now. And sort of email is being encroached by collaborative tools and things like Slack and Teams, and people are not even using email as much anymore. So there's always something changing here. There's some morphing going on in the way people communicate, but video conferencing definitely has arrived as a necessity as a result of this experiment we're in now, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. TJ, are we overstating the death of telephony?
Perhaps just a little bit. I definitely agree that there's a rise in video conferencing for sure, but we are also seeing, I mean, at Google, we have Google Voice, we have many voice products, and I think what we are seeing is that, especially for markets that have bandwidth limitations or, different scenarios, and I also think it depends on the types of users. So if you're out in the field and you're doing sales activities and things of that nature, sometimes it doesn't necessarily help if you have bandwidth restrictions on video. Obviously, 5G will change a lot of that, and I think there's a tremendous wave that's probably going to come down that's going to influence a lot of telephony and video from a 5G perspective. So I think it's true that I think the expansion of video conferencing as a behavior and a need has risen due to COVID, but I also think that there are specific reasons why telephony is still sort of the backbone or your redundancy, especially if you're mobile, or you don't have broadband, and you need to have a reliable connection.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. So moving on then, I mean, one thing that I'm really interested in is the importance of audio to video conferencing. I mean, it's called video conferencing, and video is obviously the most noticeable part of it. But I think I've spoken to a couple of you before about this. I come from a pro video background where audio is always viewed as, or has been viewed maybe unfairly, as the poor cousin to video. Is that true within the video conferencing market? And if so, is that reflected in well, the way that it's portrayed within manufacturers or end users as well? What's the picture look like? Jason, perhaps if I can ask that to you.
Yeah, so just back on the first question, I believe we're overstating the death of telephony. It's here to stay for a myriad of reasons. I find myself on conference calls where nobody's on video, they're just on voice. So voice is absolutely important to conferencing. It's the fundamental thing that you always fall back to, because people get tired of being on camera all the time. And there's times I want to get on my mobile phone and go walk on the beach and have a call rather than sit in front of my desk all day. So I think it's absolutely vital, and it's working on algorithms that allow you to cancel out background noise, dogs barking, things like this. While I was at Cisco, we did a lot of work on algorithms there within the various telepresence endpoints. So how you enhance and drive that engagement through voice, that's always your fallback. Video, in many cases, is nice to have, because I've been on calls where there's people that will never join video. They're just not comfortable doing it.
Okay. Okay, and do you think that the quality of audio has the weighting, the value that it should have within the end user base?
I mean, I'd like to be clear that I'm on record that audio is paramount, not to be equated with telephone calls. So, I do see a shift going on there in the use of the traditional telephone calls, but certainly audio and joining these types of meetings with audio is paramount. That is a critical thing. At Bose, we believe hearing is your most important sense. And the bandwidth, having people sound more natural, lowering fatigue in meetings because people sound like themselves rather than some process thing. These are all important things. And I do believe that we're going to be moving into things like stereo and spatial audio where, you can actually hear people from different directionalities, and it just makes it feel more like you're in the room with the people. That's coming, but we're taking steps towards that.
Okay, well, that's a great segue, because actually the next section I wanted to talk about was the features that are coming. Spatial audio is obviously one of those. Do you feel that spatial audio is going to be a mass market feature that it will filter into all the different platforms, or do you think it's going to be for specific applications?
I think from my perspective, it'll start in sort of niche areas where it adds the most value. Certainly the gaming industry right now is leading the way. Their products are already spatially using spatial audio and stereo. So, but I think in the work world and in jobs where those types of dynamics and brainstorming sessions or teams that utilize directionality in what they do, that's where it'll start. Like anything else, I don't think it's just going to instantaneously be adopted broadly.
Sure. Okay. So, TJ, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So fundamentally, I think audio is, we talk about this at Google is actually the main feature of video conferencing. You can't have a video conference if you don't have audio. If your video cuts out, you can still communicate. And I agree with everybody else that, being able to sort of sound natural, remove the distractions of, background noises and all of that, bringing a lot of our power processing to your point on pro audio, which is probably a standard. It's like, okay, how do we bring all of the goodness of what different industries have done before into video conferencing products and to be able to deliver? Because I think what we need to remember is that what we're trying to do is get everybody to focus on the content that's being communicated and the productive outcomes of our meetings, not necessarily the technology. So I think bringing things like spatial audio and things of that to bring yourself to a more natural environment so that you can be more efficient in what you're communicating is the ultimate goal. I agree that initially we'll start to see this in more of virtual reality, gaming, and all those other areas, but I do think it will be table stakes at some point here when the technology converges to that price performance ratio.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the key thing there is that the technology is an enabler. Excuse me. It should be invisible, essentially. The end goal is to have communication without barriers, I guess. Okay, so what about AR and VR, which is maybe a difficult question following that point, because it is more in your face, that kind of technology. It is more noticeable. Do you think there's a position in the market eventually for AR and VR within conferencing?
Yeah, it kind of ties back to the last point. As I see, spatial audio has been coming out with home video systems and sound systems because people want to recreate that cinematic experience now that they can.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing it on the iPhone with spatial audio, things like this. So for sure, those things are happening and people are beginning to demand them. But you have to have a whole different UX experience of these different collaboration platforms for that to really make sense. Creating a spatial audio experience here wouldn't make sense unless it's visually represented, right? And that's where AR and VR start to come in because they excel at that. The only problem is you're talking about animated avatars rather than actual faces and things like that. So you're losing a lot in getting that spatial audio. So there's still a lot of work to do there to figure out how do you do that more of an AR environment where you're still seeing people, they're being spatially separated, and you're getting that audio representation within that. There's a lot of work to do there, but a lot of opportunity as well.
Well, yeah, I guess then that's the holy grail of remote communication then. Is that essentially holograms? So you're not animating an avatar. You've got people sat around the room. You've got the spatial audio part. Is that eventually where we would try and get to, do you think? DJ, you were nodding as I was saying that.
I think so. I mean, if we're really looking at, where does everything want to go in a 10x sort of environment, why not? I mean, being able to see someone sitting across to you and in almost live sort of 3D and natural environment and lighting, I think, yes. Are we close to getting there? I don't think so. I think we're still in that realm of needing headsets and making sure the latency and the bandwidth can provide that. But I think ultimately, if you just look at what everyone's trying to strive to drive at, it is that virtual reality without the needing of all that tech gear, so to speak. So I think so. I think if we look, I don't want to put a number on it because I have no idea what it's going to take to get there. But even in early sort of technology demonstrations of holograms, I mean, there is definitely benefit to seeing what that looks like and feels like to the point where it's almost natural. And I think that's ultimately what I think we'll get to at some point.
Okay, thank you. So Marty, if holograms are way away, what's the next biggest development, the next game changer that we'll see within?
And some of the things we're playing with at Bose are sort of virtual rooms, even if it's just audio. And we found that experience is enhanced fairly dramatically if you're looking at a screen that shows you at least a virtual image of what's going on, like who is where in a particular virtual room. That way, when you hear a person behind you, you can look at something and sort of understand what's going on. Whereas if you didn't have that graphic, the visual, it's kind of like you've got a blindfold on in a meeting. You can hear these different people around. It's a little weird. Maybe it makes it easier to tell like who's saying what, but it's a little weird. But with the visual, it helps. So we are learning about this kind of stuff. But I always believe also that there's sort of a price value factor that comes into this. And if it's way too expensive to enable this kind of holographic experience, then we just got to wait until technology advances to the point where it does become sort of, worth what you're paying in order to get that added value. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but we do have a lot of initiatives going on. Bose is good about having sort of 5 and 10 year roadmap explorations. And so we're playing around with a lot of this stuff. It's a matter of finding that point where it brings value and the technology can deploy it, at the time. And we're seeing that like with video conferencing today. Finally, the cloud services, I think they could enable stereo and spatial audio if they wanted to easily now. But the devices and the other things that would make it a little more expensive to do holograms today are going to prevent that experience, at least in the near term. So we've got to do stuff more around just giving people, in my opinion, like different options for getting great audio, whether that be wearable or out loud products that allow you to hear and see better. And that's what we're working on in the near term at price points that make sense for people to deploy widely. And that's the phase we're entering into now, is let's go mainstream with this rather than just having engineers who know how to use the video conferencing technology using it. It's now going mainstream.
Okay, thank you. Jason, you said something interesting earlier that really sort of caught my attention, in that always on video, I think you phrased it as. So is that something you see coming down the line in terms of a cultural change, or does that require new technology to allow that?
Well, there's already platforms out there that are supporting a video window into your office and into an always on type of environment between two spaces. And I think what we're going to see is, as you're looking for driving, you had mentioned before, Adam, that social connection, having the ability to effectively be able to sit in a virtual room with your team all day and just be able to say, hey, Alice, but I have this question for you, things like that. I think we're going to see more and more of a demand for that, and having that ability again to transition in the hybrid world where you can do that at home or in the office, and that office space becomes a part of that room as well. So I think absolutely we're going to see a lot of innovation happening in that space on top of what's already out there today to really adapt to what people want for social engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's a really interesting idea. And yeah, something we would definitely benefit from, I think. So one of the other things that I think everyone is felt the absence of, well, certainly in the industry over the past 8 months, is the lack of trade shows. There have been various different virtual trade shows and attempts to replicate the trade show experience virtually. Do you think that we'll ever be able to really capture the kind of trade show, not necessarily the experience, but the benefits you get from a trade show using collaboration technology? TJ, if I come to you on that.
So there are two sides to this. I definitely think that with the pandemic, a lot of trade shows and event spaces have needed to sort of adapt to virtual environments, and it's almost like going into video production at that point, or live video production. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and a lot of the video conferencing providers, including Google Meet, we're thinking about that. We have YouTube Live and all those other things. But I think that there's still a lot of innovation left on the table in terms of how can you bring that level of, let's call it, production access to everyday person or a large team in a collaboration setting. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I do think that there are certain types of events where things may not necessarily work out virtually. For example, CES, right? What does a virtual CES look like where you can't actually touch and feel the devices, or a furniture expo? And I think this is where, again, are the things like virtual reality going to kind of help with that? Even if they could, to some degree, you still can't touch and feel some of these things. And I think that that's where some of the breakdown may happen. But I do think that in spite of that, there's a lot of industries that could benefit from just moving things virtually to provide more engagement, a global reach, and not necessarily have to force people to, fly into specific locations. But yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to just jump in on that real quick and just say, I think it's a really tough problem. I think in my experience, the shows that I've been to virtually over the last, 4 or 5 months, some have been very rewarding and worth my time, and some haven't. So I think the ones where you're training or you're listening to keynotes, I mean, it works fine for that kind of one-way stuff, but you're really missing that human dynamic. I know in our industry, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I really do miss those sort of in-person relationships, being with people, the dinners out, like, how do you replicate that social side? Very, very hard to do. So it just doesn't feel the same, and I'm not sure where that's going to end up. I'm not sure we can ever replace that, and hopefully we never have to replace that.
Well, fingers crossed.
Right.
I'm quite conscious of time, so just the last question I'd like to direct to Jason, if that's okay. What interests me is, we've talked a lot on here about the cultural side of things, and how video conferencing has been embraced culturally, not just within the workplace, but with consumers as well. If the pandemic disappeared tomorrow, how culturally embedded do you think video conferencing and collaboration now is, after this 8-month period of saturation? And the reason I ask that is because I think it was Martin was saying, with people joining video calls and not even turning the video on. Essentially, that's the same thing as a phone call. So would people go back to their old ways, or do you think that now video conferencing is here to stay in this mass market way?
I think it's here to stay, but you're going to see a reduction in use. If people were all suddenly able to go back to the office or go back to school, people will realize it's possible to do things. You might be willing to work that 2 or 3 days home more, but I think you'll see a substantial reduction. I don't think we've been doing this long enough for it to really embed itself in broader society in the way that we might think. People would snap back to their old ways pretty quickly. I see that all the time in all sorts of places where you've been doing something for a decade. You may be forced for a while, but you want to go back to your old ways as soon as you can. So there still needs to be more innovation on how that gets used. And I think, I don't think there is a reality where suddenly everyone's going back. It's going to be a hybrid, and that's what's going to embed it further and further into society and cultural aspects over time.
Okay, Marty, did you want to add to that at all?
No, I'm in total agreement. I do think that we're going to get back to some sense of normalcy here eventually, and but I do believe there has been a significant shift in the utilization, and it's not going to go back to where it was pre-COVID. It's going to be significantly more heavily used.
Yeah, absolutely. TJ, any closing thoughts from you on that?
Not really. I think everyone said it. It's just the same. There's definitely a shift. Is it going to stay at the same levels? Probably not. But I do think that there's been an adaptation of how people are working, and also opportunities, right? So I'm just looking at teams and how they operate, where some roles required you to be in the same place, and today people are hiring remotely, and I think that's going to bring in a lot of more quality in innovation and also opportunities. And I think, so whatever you're losing on the one side, you're gaining on the other. And I think it's overall just going to be a net positive in utilization.
Okay, thank you. I see that Sarah's popped up.
Yes, thank you very much, panelists. We've had an interesting question actually come in from the audience, from Andrew Belavia of Knowles. Obviously, a very good point made about the clarity of audio, but he's made the point, which is true, about people with hearing loss, because it can become very fatiguing over time, and equally good quality video in terms of lip reading. Are there other solutions, maybe like sound zones, or we talked about hearables and headphones that maybe could enhance that audio for individual participants? Could you talk to that subject?
I know at Bose, we have an entire division dedicated to sort of wellness and developing hearing assist products, as well as hearing aid type products. So we are working on noise filtering and allowing people to hear better in noisy environments like restaurants, places where you might be doing business in a coffee shop or something like that. But people with hearing problems really suffer in those conditions more so than those without. So we are studying that. We're developing, sort of AI machine learning type of algorithms that help people in those kinds of scenarios. And we plan to roll that out not only in the hearing assist products, but more broadly into our other room and wearable products.
Yeah, accessibility is a big thing for us at Google. We take it very seriously, and we make sure that our hardware, even our newer hardware that we just launched, which includes all that AI and ML that removes background noises to with True Voice, bringing out really clarity in the voice. But we also have invested a lot of time in real-time live captions and accuracy of the captions. So that you don't have to necessarily look at the lip reading. So being able to use a lot of the technology and the processing power that we have to bring more tools and availability to those with accessibility needs.
Thank you. Jason, anything to add there? Or
I would just build on what TJ said. One of the things that we've been doing at Intel broadly is for our all hands or executive syncs, we're closed captioning those now. And it's bringing that kind of technology to every conference call where you can have a live transcription happening that's relatively good, that allows you to have closed captioning in every context for accessibility.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much. That's a great answer there for Andrew at Knowles. Well, that's the end of the session, guys. I'd like to thank you very, very much indeed. For the audience, please stay tuned. We've got our next guest presenter, TikTok, which will be with us very shortly. But thank you very much indeed, guys.